Good afternoon. I'm Karen Spellman, and it's June the 7th, 2017, and I'm part of the Black Power Chronicles project conducting an oral history at the University of the District of Columbia here in Washington, D.C. This afternoon, I'm proud to be able to conduct the interview with one of the icons of the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, Reginald James Robinson. And we are just fortunate to have him. This is a very rare interview because he doesn't talk to too many people too often anymore about his past. So welcome, Reggie, to the program this afternoon.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Let's get started with the beginning. Let's start at the beginning. Why don't you tell the audience about your childhood, how you grew up, and what influences did you have in your upbringing that tilted you toward becoming a servant of the people?
Well, I grew up basically in East Baltimore. I was the third of three children. I guess being in the church, my family was surrounded by a church. My dad came from Smithfield, Virginia. My mom came from North Carolina. And in those days, the church would be very instrumental in helping folks get their lives together. And so my father, along with my uncles, built a church in East Baltimore called Faith Baptist Church, which still sits on the corner of Ashland and Bond today. John Hopkins hasn't taken it over yet. But so most of our activities was centered around the church. I went to Dunbar High School, which was also in the neighborhood. I learned to swim at Chick Webb Memorial Center, the first indoor pool in East Baltimore. And I had an aunt, well, my uncle was the head trustee of this particular church. And my aunt, my mother's older sister, was like head of the missionaries. And at age 7, 8, or 9, we would go to the indigent hospital and dump bedpans and read to people and wash people's faces and wash people's feet and stuff like that. And we were sunbeams. So I came through the church being a sunbeam and then became a young missionary. And but then after a fashion, I was sitting in a French class in the 10th grade. And I was looking out on Caroline Street, wondering why I was sitting in this French class when I had other activities on the street. So I decided that I would go on the street. I did. I very soon thereafter found that the street was not all that I had expected it to be. And a good cousin of mine, Josephine, was a supervisor at Social Security. And she had gone to a school called Cortez Peters Business College. So my cousin kind of pulled my coat and said, you know, you ought to come on in and act like you got some sense. And she says, if you want to, I'll go talk to Uncle Leroy, which was my daddy. And my daddy loved Josephine because everybody loved Josephine because she was a supervisor at Social Security. In them days, that's big doings. So Josephine got my dad to give me another chance. And I enrolled into Cortez Peters Business College. Well, this was, I guess, about 59. 1959. Along about 60, the dean of the school, Walter Dixon, who also was the first black city councilman of Baltimore, had put in a public accommodations bill in Baltimore. And he came to me one day and he says, I want you to go to a meeting to represent the school. I said, what are you talking about? We called him Chrome Dome because he had a big bald head. But anyway, he said, I want you to go to this meeting and with the rest of these students, and I want you to represent the school. So I went to this meeting, and all of these people there was from Morgan and John Hopkins and Loyola and all of the big schools in Baltimore. All of the students were there. And it was the civic interest group, which was the student group in Baltimore, which was the affiliate of SNCC at the time. Well, I got involved with that and began to demonstrate, and we would go and close down restaurants. We had 2 Renaults, and we used to pile in the Renaults, and I was kind of like in the strategy department, and we would map out where these Renaults would go like lunchtime, and then everybody would jump out the cars and go into these white restaurants and take up all the seats. And then when the police came and read the Miranda Act, then we would get up, not unless we had designated somebody to go to jail, everybody would get up, get back in the Renaults, and go to another restaurant. And we would do that until the Commerce, the Baltimore Commerce folks got very upset and decided to talk to us about that. Okay. But I stayed with CIG until I became, and then I was asked to become the treasurer of the group. Well, some monies came down. I didn't find out till later on that this monies was for the campaign of Clarence Mitchell III, who was about to go to the State House. But there was a voter registration project put on, and most of the work was done in Clarence's district. Well, anyway, I was made treasurer because I went to Cortez Peters and I knew a little bit about accounting. I knew a debit from a credit, and I could do a balance sheet and go back and tell the advisory group what we had spent. I'd keep receipts and stuff, and I would work with the advisory group, and they would then give us money, and then we would continue to do our sit-ins and bail money and stuff like that. Well, that continued on until Clarence was the representative from Maryland to the coordinating committee, to the SNCC committee, coordinating committee. At this time, his folks was telling him that he had to make a choice of either staying with the students or coming back into the family fold to do whatever it is that they wanted him to do. So the spot became open. So I kind of wiggled my way around, and I got to be the representative to go to the next meeting. That was in June of '61. That meeting was in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, what happened was, the couple of nights before we were supposed to go, they had a party, and I got hit in the eye with a pretzel. So I'd gone to the doctor, and by the time I got ready to go to Kentucky, I had this black pirate's patch over my eye. So when I walked into the SNCC meeting, of course, I didn't realize, everybody thought that I had gotten injured on a demonstration or something or another. But I was a new face in town. And everybody was saying how Clarence was never around in the meetings and he was never reporting in and this and that and that. So I said, well, that's that. So I didn't know anybody. And that was like, I got in town on a Friday. So like Saturday, we were having a little get together. You know how we have our little get togethers. And we were at Ann Braden's house. Well, of course, I was still unknown and didn't know anybody. And I just kind of moseyed out on Ann's porch, back porch, and had a beer and was just standing there. And this lady walked out to me and she said, "I know you, son." And I said, "You do?" She said, "Yes." She says, who's your people?" And I told her who my father was. And she said, "No, that's not it." She says, "Who's your mama?" And I told her my mama was Leo Vesta Jenkins from Littleton, North Carolina. She said, "Aha, you are McKinley." I said, "No, my uncle is McKinley." She says, "I know." And she says, "And you look just like him." I was talking to Miss Ella Baker, who in fact grew up with my mama in Littleton, North Carolina. They had been growing up together. She knew all my uncles and everybody. And this uncle that she said that I looked like was my Uncle McKinley, who lived in New York, who she worked with in New York. Well then, of course, I got to know Miss Ella. And so by the time I came back into the meeting, I was treated a little differently. The guys began to come around me, and I had the charge of bringing the next SNCC meeting back to Baltimore, because ever since the students had sat in Greensboro, all the activity had been in the South and nothing had come to North. And now we're discussing voter registration and direct action, so we're getting ready to make the big change. And King is saying to us, "You can't do it because you're going to get killed," and all of this kind of stuff. So I got the meeting back to Baltimore. Now this is July 71.
61.
61, I'm sorry, July 61. We get the meeting back to Baltimore, and it's decided that we're gonna have a big mass meeting. Well, on our advisory committee was a man by the name of Sam Daniels, who was the big, I don't know what you call him in the Masons, but he was the biggest Mason in town. So he gave us the Masonic Temple to have a rally. Of course, King was in town, and everybody wanted to see King and everything. So as folks was getting together to come in, I said to the group, I said to the SNCC group, I says, "Why don't we do something different this time? Why don't we, as soon as people sit down, let's take the collection. Let's not wait for the preachers to say their prayers and everything. We're gonna take the collection and then let them go on and do whatever they're gonna do." And we did. So by the time Wyatt T got up and was getting ready to make his plea for the collection, he was told that we had gotten the money and gone. And so we split the money between the Civic Interest Group and SNCC, the local group and SNCC. So then I was asked, I was viewed as the voter registration expert. Now, we had registered some 35,000 people in a couple of months, but what we did in Baltimore We had sound trucks, we had buses, and we rode through the neighborhood giving out sodas and everything else, and taking people down on the buses to the registrar's office, big lines, press, everything. And so we could gather people that way in Baltimore. So I was considered to be a voter registration expert. So I was asked if I wanted to go into Mississippi. So I thought about it and I said, yes, I want to go. So then I was assigned to go and meet Bob Moses in Cleveland, Mississippi, up at Amzie Moore's house. Well, I took the train into Atlanta. Old Ed King was our executive secretary at the time. He met me at the station in black tie and tails because he had just integrated the opera the night before, and he had been hanging out in Pascal's all night long. So, and then he, of course, Ed was quite he was quite the character. He just took me around to everybody and introduced me to everybody. And then we got the word that Bob was not in Cleveland, but in Macomb. So the next morning, I took the train into New Orleans, took the train out of New Orleans up to Macomb. There I was met by George Heads, who was a local guy in Macomb. I was dressed in a black suit, black tie, white shirt, little briefcase, because we were always told back in them days you had to dress the part. We weren't dressing in jeans then. We had to wear our uniform. Suited up. So they thought I was a young preacher that just came to town. So George took me to C.C. Bryant's house where I met Bob, and then we started talking, and then Bob and I left, and I got my orders from Bob to go and open up a bank account, open up a store, go to the store and get office supplies, set up an office, set up the school, and just do the general kinds of get-together work before anybody else was coming to town. And the next person that came to town was John Hardy.
Mm. Before you go into more detail about Mississippi, I want to back up just a little bit, because a lot of the young people, young social justice activists now, ask us about how SNCC was organized. You know, how was it set up? What kind of hierarchy was it? How did people communicate with each other? And so I wanted to get, as you came in from the outside, from the Civic Action Group, and began working with the SNCC folks, how did the flow work with you, and who was doing the flowing?
Well, after the introduction from Mrs. Baker, I was accepted by Sherrod and the powers that be, like McDew and Charlie Jones and Tim Jenkins and Diane Nash and everybody that was sitting around that table at that time. I was kind of taken in, and so then after I got my orders, I assumed that I was a soldier, or better still, I always liked to think that I was a cowboy.
Okay.
and that I'm coming to town with a fast gun. But I'm told by the ranchers what to do. So I would do what I'm told to do. And the hierarchy at that time, as far as I was concerned, was McDew, who was the chair at that point,
Charles McDough.
Charles McDough was the chair at that point. Ms. Baker, of course, was the head leader. Tim Jenkins was the lawyer. And then when I got to Macomb, Bob was the director. So whatever it was that was to be done, they would know what was to be done, and if I could do it, I would do it. Gotcha. So in terms of hierarchy, I guess I just took the low road and became a worker, as well as being an old cowpoke and just getting in there doing what I was supposed to do. Then later on, after we had been in Macomb for a little while, of course, Herbert Lee got killed, and we were told this was a man that was from the NAACP who was working with us, was killed in a cotton gin by a state representative from working with us, and we were told by the sheriff that we should leave town and not go to his funeral. And Amzie Moore, who was one of our other advisor kind of people, said to us, if you leave now, you'll never be able to come back. You'll never be able to do anything. So what we did, we turned the funeral into a mass meeting. And so then we continued on until the students marched out of Berglund High School, and that's when they came down. They really came down on us, and I think we really got scared at that point, and because they whooped us pretty bad. That was the first time we'd really been whooped pretty bad. So we gathered, and then we decided to leave and come back to Atlanta and regroup to get our thinking together, because we were in a total disarray. And by that time, Ruby Darce Ruby Darce Robinson was in the picture, and Ruby became the person that told you what to do, when to do, and where to go. At that point, I was then sent back north to do recruiting and also to work on Route 40, because CORE was trying to deal with the road between New York and DC, because a lot of diplomats was using that road and couldn't stop over, and we couldn't stop over on that road coming between New York and DC. So we were doing demonstrations up and down that road. Well, at this point, Ruby, as I said, Ruby was the boss lady.
Why don't you describe a little bit about Ruby? Describe Ruby and her personality. I think it would be very instructive to some of the people who believe that SNCC was a male-dominated group, to explain how she made herself known.
I didn't even know how to really do that. But anyway, Ruby was a sincere kind of person, and a very matter-of-fact kind of person, a very soft kind of person as well. But she had a kind of bossy and direct way of telling you what to do. Because if you were out somewhere and you relying on, we had what was called a Watts line, which was a wide area telephone thing, and we could call in and then we'd get a phone call back. Well, if you out there and I traveled a lot by myself, so I would be very relieved when I talked to Ruby. If I'm sitting in a bus station in Selma, in Salisbury, North Carolina, under a light, just leaving Livingston College, and got to catch a bus at 4 in the morning, and nobody else is around. So all you got to do is talk to Ruby, and Ruby is telling you to be cool and be careful and getting your courage up to do what you got to do. I think that's the kind of person she was. She was a good boss and a very, very beautiful person. But anyway, getting back to, I was in Baltimore doing Route 40. I get a call from Ruby saying there was some people at the Corps office coming in from New York, getting ready to go to Crisfield, Maryland, and do a demonstration. And only about one of them had been in any action at all, and that was Angela Butler, who had been at Fisk. But the rest of these people, excuse me, had never been involved in anything. So she said, get on over there and find out what's going on. And by the time I got to the office and we had a conversation, the next thing I knew, we were on a bus to Crisfield, Maryland, going to Governor Taws's restaurant in Crisfield, Maryland, just before Christmas of 62. Yeah, 62. And we were, the slogan was going to be, there was no room in the inn. And we all went, that was the first and only time in the 6 years I worked for SNCC that I went to jail. That I got arrested.
You got arrested.
I mean, not that I went to jail, but I went to jail many times for other kinds of things. Not well, that didn't come out right.
Yeah, no. Run that again.
That was the only time that I got arrested on a demonstration. There were other times I was assigned, like when the kids went to jail in Macomb, we had to support them. So somebody had to go into the jail and talk to them and let them know everything was okay. And that person was me. I had to go inside the jail, inside the cell, just like a lawyer, and calm Curtis and Hollis and Bobby Talbot and all of those young folks down and tell them to be cool, everything's gonna be all right, we'll get you out very shortly, and so that they wouldn't be afraid, and then get out. So that, and I had done that. But here I am in jail in Princess Anne, Maryland. Well, anyway, backing up again to Maryland. We decided they decided to stay in over a weekend. I came out of jail, did the bail, did the PR stuff, and worked with a young man by the name of Freddie St. Clair from Cambridge, Maryland, and Walter Black from Cambridge. Walter was from Eastern Maryland. Freddie St. Clair was from Cambridge, Maryland. They were the bailsmen. Well, we got everybody out, and by that Christmas, we all went to New York and hung out. So after the New Year, we had discussed what we were going to do with Cambridge, because by now, the St. Clairs have asked us to come in. Freddie St. Clair became the first chairman of the Cambridge Nonviolent Action Committee. Freddie St. Clair, who is Gloria's cousin.
Gloria Dan.
Gloria Richardson Dandridge, cousin. Freddie had to eventually give up the job because he was also his father's best man, because his father owned a funeral business, so they also had a business. So Freddie couldn't be the chairman of the group and also run his business too. So then eventually Gloria took over.
Okay.
They kept it kind of in the family, and the Sinclairs go way, way back on the Eastern Shore. Well, I stayed in Cambridge for 3 years. And I dare say that Cambridge was exactly what I was taught at Highlander by Miss Bernice Robinson and Sepia Clark and Miss Baker, is that we were not to go to these towns to live, but to create people, to create organizations that are viable enough to operate on their own, to become the part of a whole, and then move on to the next zone or next arena.
Okay.
So it came time for me to move on. SNCC was having a conference in Atlanta. And
What year was this?
this is about 63 now. And Ruby, boss lady, says, I want you on the way down to Atlanta, because I'm still in Maryland. On the way down, stop at all of the campuses and talk up the conference.
Okay.
I did that. I got into Atlanta early. And when I got in, we had gotten a call from a young Reverend Johnson from Selma University that they were interested in somebody coming and talking to them because they were interested in doing something. This is somebody at Selma University. So Ruby said, okay, Reg, you got it. Go ahead. And while you're down there, go up the other end to Huntsville and go as far as you can go before the conference. But I got to Selma, Alabama, and I stayed on the campus for about 2 weeks. And I found Mrs. Boynton. I found a group of young ministers that we dubbed the name 12 High.
What did that mean?
We don't know why we named them 12 High.
Okay.
we just put a tag on them.
12 high. Okay.
The 12 High.
Okay.
So at the conference, it was decided that since Bernard Lafayette was a young minister, that he could probably relate to the group a lot better than I could. So then it was decided that he would go back to Selma at that point. That's when Bernard went into Selma. But the beginnings of Selma, I went in, and as Jack Minnis had taught us to do the surveys and look around and look at the topographical areas, look at the population, look at everything you could about just do a whole big survey of the city. And so I did that. And then I turned it loose. Well, after that, I think.
What brought you into D.C. and what date did you arrive in Washington?
Well, I got to D.C. in '66,
Okay.
around December '66, because SNCC was on its way another direction at that particular time, and I was stuck in Atlanta because nobody was really telling anybody which direction to go to. Everything was in a disarray. And McDo called me Charles McDew called me and said, I want you to come to D.C. and be my assistant at the United Planning Organization, at the NDC-1 Center down at 9th and P Street. And you're going to be working with your old buddy, Ralph Featherstone. Well, Fleetfoot and me, that's Ralph Featherstone for those who don't know.
Say, what is the nickname?
We called him Fleetfoot because he used to be a track star.
Mm-hmm.
But we had an apartment together on Park Road, and
yeah, I remember.
and we took advantage. We had about 8 or 9, maybe 10 community workers. Now, the community workers were kind of famous people. Petey Green, Miss Lillian Green. There was an old hustler by the name of Nacky Sacky. And then there was an old numbers runner named Buckle Jaws Johnson. And all of these folks were in the community. And this was when they were getting ready for the model cities was just about coming in at that point. Because Fauntleroy was supposedly out in front of all of this kind of stuff. But what we were really trying to do was get folks not to sell their houses. And one of the first plots of land that left was the group of houses on P Street, going west from in back of the church, where the school is now, but in back of the church, in back of Shiloh Church. And we were trying to keep the community together with O Street Market and all those things, and try to keep people from selling their stuff and keep the community together. And that's why we had all of these local folks as community workers, because the other people in the community knew who they were.
Were these community workers staff employees of UPO?
They were staff.
Yes. Describe the structure of how UPO got out in the community and how the personnel worked and what an NDC, Neighborhood Development Center, was.
Well, you'd have kind of like an outpost. Well, the big office was down on Vermont Avenue. But then you'd have these outposts in Northwest. You had 1, 2, and 3. You had one down at 9th and P. You had another one at 14th and Clifton. And you had number 3 up at Park Road, which was called Change. And each one of these places had a director, probably an assistant director, and a social worker. And you had several community workers who would go out, who would fan out in the community to collect data on any and every kind of problem that you could possibly think of. One of the things that came out of NDC-1 was Barnabon, which was Petey and his boys, which was Reverend Jefferson, started Barnabon, which was a bonding company that bonded guys who were just coming out of prison to get jobs, because every time they'd go for a job, somebody'd say, you can't get this job because you just got out of prison. So this bonding company would bond you to get this particular job if necessary. So we were doing that kind of stuff. Then came Ernie Middleton with the youth. They stuck on a youth division onto um, the 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 project.
Of
They
NDC
became
one?
well, each one of the centers
Had their own
had
youth?
their own youth division.
Okay.
And so then they started trying to reach down to the youth.
Okay.
Like for one thing, they were trying to again build up the Kennedy Center at that time. Kennedy Center didn't get built up until much later, until the community absolutely changed. But they still tried to deal with the kids.
The Kennedy Recreation Center.
Kennedy Recreation Center.
P and 7.
Right, P and 7. But then they tried to do things with the youth, and there were a lot of gangs around, so we're doing gang work. This was before Marion came along with Pride. These guys were hiring the youth department was hiring the young gangs to try and consolidate them, to get them into another vision other than shooting and cutting and stuff like that, and get them to stay in school and stuff like that.
Let me just backtrack just a little bit to the Meredith March in Mississippi. Were you a part of the Meredith March? Did you manage to get down there and be a part of the demonstration? And on that march was the time when Stokely called for Black Power. What happened to you as a result of Black Power? Were you there when Stokely uttered Black Power, and Stokely and Ricks called for Black Power? And in your mind, at the time when you heard it, what did it mean to you personally in the work that you were doing in SNCC at the time?
I wasn't there. I wasn't in Mississippi at that particular time.
Okay.
But I was in touch primarily with Bob Mance out of Alabama. And what it said to me was that we were going to take another direction, or other than voter registration and getting folks elected. We were now going to try and deal with some economic development. And my idea is that we were going to start trying to find ways of people making money, resources that would put people to work, resources that would really put people in houses, getting people into businesses. I'm very sorry that it got kind of turned around once our friends left Alabama and went back to California, and then they pulled out the guns, and then all of a sudden we were to go around shooting folks, and it just took away from where I sat, just took away the whole idea as to what we were trying to do, because we were talking about freedom schools, we were talking about anything but shooting. We were talking about survival, we were talking about economic development, as I thought.
Did the Washington Black Power translation, when Marion came to D.C. in '65, I guess, to set up the SNCC office there, were you a part of that? And did you become involved with the SNCC, the local SNCC action there here in D.C.?
Well, I was 65.
65.
No, I was coming out of Philadelphia. Okay. That was my last assignment before I was sent to Atlanta. I was running the Philadelphia office because I come from New York.
Okay.
Because I'd been doing special gift fundraising with Bobby Yancey.
In the New York SNCC office.
In the New York SNCC office. So then we met some folks, and they decided that we would set up an office in Philadelphia to raise money. And I met several black professional guys in Philadelphia that set me up in an apartment, set me up in an office, set me up in terms of knowing who was who in town, and we were ready to raise money. And we were out on the main line in the Jewish community, and we were doing quite well until I can't think of the young man's name, but he came through. He said he was with SNCC, but he came through and he got kind of crazy with his situation, and they started beating up on him, and he started shooting and carrying on, and away went the money, and away went the folks kind of liking us in Philly, and down went that kind of operation. So then I was sent to I was sent back to Atlanta, waiting to go to Texas, because Jim was getting ready to send me, Jim Foreman, who at that time was also the secretary with the big boss, was getting ready to send me to Texas to work with some people. I haven't forgotten who it was now, but even which city it was. I think it was
Houston?
was it?
Houston?
No, it wasn't Houston.
Dallas, or San Antonio?
2 words, San Antonio. San Antonio. And there was a group that had said that they wanted to talk with us about helping us to raise money. But then, like I said, everything was in a disarray at that time. And I'm waiting around Atlanta, and of course, our man Stanley was running the office.
Stanley Wise.
And we didn't know which end was up and which end was down at that point in time. No puns. But so Chuck came along and said,
Come
hey,
up to D.C.
Come up to D.C. And I left, and we stayed a year in here, and then we both left, because then I left here after a year and went back to Mississippi. Ed Brown got me to go down and work with the Child Development Group of Mississippi, doing the same thing, running the social service department, which also had community outreach people who was the tentacles that touched the community. And that was my gang, and I had, and at my right hand was our old friend Myrtle Glasgow, and Myrtle would take care of my proposals, because I wasn't academically right and everything, so she would take care of that part, and I would take care of the organizing part, and we had us a good thing going on until I was in a meeting, and they were splitting up CDGM. And Senator Stennis had sent one of his people to this meeting. And this guy, every time he would say something, he would say, "You boys, can I say something to you boys? Do you boys understand?" And finally, I couldn't take no more, and I looked him dead in his face and said, "Do you see any boy," I use Low French, "in this room?" Well, all of the Negroes fell out the chairs. And of course, 2-3 days later, I get a call to the boss's office, and he said, "You know I gotta let you go." I said, "I knew you were gonna let me go when I spoke up, because you wasn't gonna say nothing. Y'all wasn't gonna say a word. So yeah, I know, and goodbye, because I got another job." And I went to work for Noel Day, who was out of Boston, who ran for Congress. We ran against McCormick one time, who married Peggy Damon, our girl from New York. And
So bring yourself back to Washington at this point.
okay, okay.
Bring yourself back to Washington.
Okay.
You're a traveling man.
Well, I've been out there by myself
Yes,
most
sir.
of this time.
You've been out there all by yourself. Man.
Yeah,
Amazing
yeah. But
story.
anyway, okay. So I do get back to Washington after about 4 years. I got married in between. That didn't last either. But anyway,
You tried.
Yeah, well, yeah, things happen. And so I came back. I got back here, I guess, about 71.
Okay.
And
Describe what was going on in D.C. in 71.
well,
What was
the
happening?
biggest thing that was happening in D.C. at that time was a challenge for the charter.
Okay.
That meant that we were trying to upseat the Dixiecrats who was running the city. And it was being run by McMillan out of South Carolina. So we had to upseat him in order to get the rest of them out. So we finally did it, and we didn't get home rule, but we did get the chance to, as Marion puts it, did get a chance to play with some money. And we got a chance to hire some people and do something with some money. And they say Marion used the money to hire people who would have never, ever, ever got a job. Mm-hmm. You can meet some folks now who are 40 years old will tell you Marion Barry gave me my first job and gave me my first start. And Marion and some people who were in business that if it wasn't for the fact that Marion used the money the way that he did in trying to develop our community, because we had a community full of restaurants, full of shoe stores. We owned businesses. U Street was a great street to be on. You could get you a fish sandwich almost every other door. Now you can't hardly get it except for Henry's at 17th and U. You can't even get a fish sandwich on U Street. But them days it was we were doing what I thought was black power. Mm-hmm. We were using our monies to do business and to grow. As a matter of fact, we had a computer company on the corner of 14th and Kenyon called Afro-American Datadynamics. For those of you who are computer literate, we had a PDP 1145. The only big machine, the only machine outside of a university between here and Florida, owned by black folks. And all we were trying to do was just teach folks how to use computers. But we were a little bit before our time, and Pepco kind of beat us out because the machine ate up more than we could pay Pepco to keep it running. But anyway.
Who were the people that started the Afro-American Datadynamics?
Afro-American Datadynamics was started by Milton White, who was a captain in the Air Force, and also a professor at Howard University, and Texera Nash, who was an artist, a local artist. Mm-hmm. And one of the main things that we did with that computer, we called Marion's first election to the numbers.
1978.
1970. We to the numbers. I took the printout to the big boss and say, "Look here, you is the winner." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "If you can read, you can see right here, you is the winner." And then I took it to some other folks who was kind of skeptical about who Marion was and hadn't gotten on his team yet. For instance, like Mr. Lucy, and we went fishing. And I took the printout. And in them days, you had them big long sheets, long printout sheets. And we were fishing, and we looked it over, and there it was. There was the numbers, and it came out to the numbers.
Wow.
So
before Marion won the election in '78, he, of course, started Pride Incorporated.
he had Pride Incorporated.
And I wondered if you had been involved with Pride, and could you give folks an idea about what Pride did and what it meant to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, Marion had started a very simple project, primarily of taking gangs and teaching them how to sweep, teaching them how to work and make money. And then he turned that into a business, and he was able to send some of those guys to college. He had 3 levels in there: cell, rel, and hell.
Say that again.
Cell, rel, and hell.
And hell. Okay.
And hell was when you were really tough to deal with, but he would continue to try and work with you and bring you around. And these were no light teenagers that we were dealing with. These were show enough gangster kids. And he had developed a way to talk to them, to show them a way, and show them how to make money, and show them how that if they worked hard, they could make it. And him and his wife, Mary at the time, Mary Treadwell, did a very good job of doing that. And Pride lasted a long, long time.
Do you remember roughly what the dates were when Pride was started?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't remember the dates.
Okay. I know it was on U Street, right?
Yep, it was right there on the corner, 16th and U.
16th and U.
Right there on the corner, 16th and U.
Okay.
And then after Pride, I took a little hiatus. I was unemployed between then and the dynamics went down, and I drew unemployment for a while. And then after that, I went to work for the district government in 81. In
81.
In
okay.
1981.
So Marion was elected in '78.
In '78.
Did you participate in any of the campaign work, or were you around to see the campaign happening? And talk about that a little bit. You know,
Well, I wasn't directly involved in the campaign. I was always on the fringes.
Okay.
He would give me a call to do certain things. I would do certain things for him. I would run errands. I would do certain things for him, whatever he would ask me to do. But I was never directly or paid by the staff. I didn't want to be on the staff, because being on the staff hinders you from being creative and doing whatever you think you need to do. So I didn't go on staff. I stayed on the outside.
Did you work with Marshall Brown at any point in your community organizing, and can you kind of describe the significance of people like Marshall Brown that are in and around? He very much like you in a way, folks who work the street.
Yeah, the only real time we worked really worked together was when his son Kwame decided to run for office. He came to me and said what he wanted to do, and he didn't have anybody to help him out at that particular time. So he asked me to come and help him out. So I went on the corners with him in the morning and waved signs and did everything that we needed to do to get the campaign started. And I worked the very first campaign with Marshall, and we won the first campaign. I didn't do very much in the second campaign, but Marshall and I became very, very good friends. We didn't so much work together as a friendship. But we did do a few things together, like organizing a few things here and there. And when he went to Ohio to work for Hillary Clinton, he gave me a call, and I did a few things for him in that light. And so, I mean, it was always like that.
Sure, I got you.
It was always like that.
Well, let's go back to your involvement, how you entered government, city government. Marion had won the election in 1978, took office in 79. And then how did you become involved with the Barry administration?
Well, I got a call from the grand... Nah, I ain't gonna say that. I got a call...
This is an interview for young people.
I got a call from Ivanhoe Donaldson, who we had been friends in SNCC and been friends for years. And this was the second year for the youth development stuff. And they were getting ready to go computerized. They were going to try and computerize all of this stuff.
What was the youth stuff? Tell us a little bit about
it. Well, it was the youth. It was the youth employment program.
Okay.
And Sandra Hill, who was in charge of getting the applications organized in such a fashion as to go into the computer, she needed somebody in back of her to assist her. So Ivanhoe asked me to come aboard to assist Sandra Hill in her efforts. Only because he knew I knew something about computers. I was reluctant because, again, I didn't want to come into government because it was too confining. And I've never been really in situations where I was confined in what I was to do. I was always told what was needed to be done, and then I would go and do it. So I knew I was going to have difficulties. But Sandra was easy to work with. Some of the other people were not so easy to work with. But anyway, I went in, and we put together a good program that year. We hired some 40,000 people that summer. Everybody got paid on time. Everybody went to their right jobs, and everything clicked. Because we spent hours checking and rechecking and checking and rechecking, and matching stuff and making sure that everything was supposed to where it was supposed to be. And then that school year we hired some 25,000 kids. So the year became very, very good. And so then I realized that this may be my last opportunity to work or to really receive a check that would lead me to some kind of retirement of some sort. So again, I looked around, and I spotted a little something in the disability department. It was a spot for an investigator, and I opted for that, and I got it. And I became the investigator for the employment division. And then from there, again, what happened, they were still operating by paper. Again, I got caught up into the mechanism. And so by the time I left, I had helped develop the mechanism by which it was automated.
Disability.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you were an ex-SNCC, well, SNCC people are never ex-SNCCs, but you were a SNCC person that went into the Barry administration. What was it like in the Barry administration? Did other people who were in the movement find a place in the Barry administration, and or did they run for city council? Who were some of those folks that you saw besides Marshall's son, Kwame?
Yeah.
Did you have a relationship with Johnny Wilson, for example?
Well, that was, I had a relationship with Johnny when I first came back to town. Yeah, get a little swallow of water here.
Yeah, go right here. Go ahead.
Johnny was, well, most folk call him John, but we call him Johnny.
Yeah, we call him Johnny.
We
You're
call
right.
him Johnny.
You're right.
So folks don't get confused what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's why I was able to hang out as long as I did without getting a real job, is because I would do things for Johnny. Johnny was like he was like my contact through the charter. I was taking my orders from him as to what I was doing. So, and then even in his first campaign, I was helping him in his first campaign.
What do you remember? What year that was?
Ooh.
Don't bother. But his first campaign. Okay.
But his first campaign came
John
out
Wilson.
of that. Came out of that.
Okay.
But when I came back here in '71, so what was 71, 73, 74, somewhere around.
We can get it. Don't worry. Yeah.
That we were working on the charter and working on other kinds of stuff, and Johnny would hand me certain kind of consultancies, and then ask me to do kinds of things. So Johnny was my contact person for the first 4 or 5 years I was here.
Okay. And how did John's career
71.
evolve from the Charter Commission? What was his job there, and then how did he evolve into elected?
Johnny was like the head coordinator for the charter. He was like the head organizer for the charter. He was putting together most of the strategies, along with Fauntleroy and the rest of them. And he was helping to raise the monies and doing all of the dirty work and all of the menial kind of stuff that don't nobody else has to do, and then I would get it. But it didn't matter. I mean, if he needed me to do something, I would do it. Okay. And that's just the kind of friendships that we had. I mean, it's like most of my friends that if they ask me to do something, I don't mind doing it. I mean, most of them are not.
A lot of people that will probably see this tape don't know John Wilson or Johnny Wilson. Could you give us a, your personal description of who he was and what he stood for and his significance for Washington, D.C.?
Well, he came out of Princess Anne, Maryland. He went to the University of Maryland Salisbury, at
Tell-
Eastern Shore. He worked for years with as a lobbyist before he started the charter business. Before they took him, before he became head of the charter operation. He was a good-looking guy, very funny, very generous to his friends. He was important to. He became city council chair, and he was going to be mayor. But Johnny had for years had a sickness that close folks knew about, and Johnny would not take his medicine. So he stopped taking his medicine, and he just kind of gave up on life because he just got disgusted with the situation because it just wasn't panning out for him, I think. But he was a good guy, and he was very important to the city. He started out in Ward 2, and as I said, and he became city council chair, second most important elected person in the city.
Folks say that Johnny taught Marion how to do the city budget.
No doubt, because he did have a good head on him. He did it when he would put himself to it. When he was really, really serious. He's a very terribly, terribly smart person. Very, very sharp. Very sharp. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He made Marion shine.
Let me ask you about the institutions, the independent institutions that grew up during the Black Power era, and some of the people who were involved in those. And one of the people I wanted to ask you about would get your take on his significance for D.C. and for the Black Arts movement, and that is Gaston Neal.
Oh.
Buddy Gaston.
Yes, good old Gaston.
Who was at one time the poet laureate of Washington, D.C.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And one of the best book salesmen ever to be.
Absolutely. Do you remember some of Gaston's work in the Black Arts movement at all? Did you recall any of the plays that he did, the street theater pieces? I knew he was a neighborhood development worker. I remember that. You know, he worked at NBC too.
Yeah, because there was. I'm trying. There was. I got his. I see a buddy of his. I can't think of his name. He was on my staff. He was a tall guy, and he was a musician, and he was Gaston's like #1 man.
Okay.
And I recall them doing something down at Shiloh one time. And I can't think of that guy's name there. But anyway, yeah, he was very instrumental in doing the artsy kinds of stuff around town.
You know,
How much, I don't really know, but he was a very, very likable, lovable guy, and a real good friend.
all right. You knew Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael from your SNCC work. And,
Yes.
As he evolved, do you have any memories that you'd like to share with us about the significance of his work and his energy and his vision?
He was he was the most misunderstood person that I know. What he would say would be very true and very hard to take. And that's why I think people was afraid of him, because he told the truth. And his words were very sharp. And you had to be in your right mind in order to accept what he was saying. Because if it didn't, it'd scare you to death. And he was in some ways he was really funny. Like I wasn't there, but I was told about a time in Alabama that some of the boys ran into a little bit of trouble, and somebody threw him a loaded pistol, and he threw it back and said, "I'll meet y'all back at the house." Well, that didn't quite sit with some of the guys, because he was out there advocating one thing and seemed like he was turning his back on the other. And then in another instance, we were down in Waveland, Mississippi, and somebody was coming in on the pier, and we were all laying on the deck. And he was laying there next to me and Feather and Jim, and our nonviolence had left us. So, I mean, like I say, I guess he was a misunderstood kind of person. And folks who didn't know him, I guess, just didn't know him.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so we're getting to the conclusion. I know you're tired, and this has been a wonderful remembrance. So it has to be hard to think about 50 or 60 years back and try to get the story the way it should have been told. But this has been very, 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 very fruitful in terms of getting some of that history that we don't have, and a lot of young people don't have. Now, to conclude, I wanted to just talk about you as one of the SNCC folks described you as the glue of the Washington, D.C. community, activist community. And you were famous for two events that you carried on for many years in Washington. And one was Reggie's annual fish fry. And the other was the Juneteenth celebration that you would organize folks from all over to go down camping with you in that mosquito-infested area of Assateague. I had suffered through that. So I wanted to ask you, what was the impetus for doing the work, that kind of community building work that you did? And what do you think, did you get a good vibe out of it, or what was the importance of it to you personally?
Well, the Juneteenth situation came out of a conversation with me, Charlie, and Ann.
Charlie Cobb
and Ann Chin.
Mm-hmm.
And because Charlie and Ann had been traveling for a little bit, and they'd found this place called Assateague Island. And they said, you know, we ought to do something on Juneteenth. So I said, well, let's just call some folk together, see what folks will do. So the first time we asked folks did they want to go with us. A few folks said yeah, and we went down to a place that would only allow you to set up at night, and you had to get to it's like going to a homeless shelter. Mm-hmm. You had to get there before the rest of the folk get there, or else you wouldn't get a spot. And then you had to pick up your stuff the next morning and take it with you. But after about a couple of years, Ann and Charlie found this place in Chinkatink that allowed us to set up our tents for weeks at a time. So then it became a kind of thing where we could, we'd tell folks, and folks, we'd show pictures of it, and folks would say, yeah, we want to try and do it. And before we know it, people were coming, and we would have, sometimes at our height, we would have maybe 400 or 500 people down in there. And we would cook our own food and have our own kind of celebration. And those who would come new, we would introduce them to Yukon Jack, which is almost a 250 proof whiskey that was between me and Charlie. Every time Charlie would go to Africa or would leave, me and Charlie would sit and drink us a bottle of Yukon Jack before he left, and then we would drink us a bottle when he come back. Just that was between me. So we used that as a celebration. So Juneteenth just became a thing with people to just be with us on that, and that became a good success. Now the fish fries, I just decided that I just like to cook fish and like to smile and see my friends eat fish and slobber on themselves and drop fish on the floor and get drunk and just have a good time, because it seemed like we were always going to some funeral, or we were going to something miserable or dangerous. So it was just one of those kind of outlet kind of things that just became an annual kind of thing that I just do. And so it would just happen.
It didn't just happen, but you organized it very well.
Well, I'd call folks. Well, I also would have I kept a list of SNCC folks for a long, long time. And that was because I had that computer back in the day, and and anybody that was looking for anybody could call me to find out who's who, where's who. And so I just became the person to call.
The movement communicator, that's who you were.
Yeah, I didn't volunteer for it. It just kind of happened that way.
Dropped in your lap.
So I guess that's the way the fish frying and Juneteenth just kind of happened. And it was good things that happened.
Well, having participated in both of them kind of frequently, I can tell you the whole Washington, D.C. activist community is very indebted to you for doing what you did and keeping us all together, being the glue of activism here in Washington. So we're about at the end now. Do you have anything that you'd like to say that I haven't asked you about?
I would hope that one of the things that we would begin to really think about doing is moving more towards economic development. We done voter registration. We got the most black elected officials in Mississippi, and the folks are still poor. We don't control no industries. We don't hire nobody. That's what I want to see happen. I want to see us put some institutions on the corner, and if we don't do no more than get a laundromat, we got to wash our drawers. We ride bicycles. We got scientists. I mean, we should have a group of money that allows somebody to set up a situation where we can go back to Macomb, Mississippi, now that we know the mayor of there, okay, or Cambridge, Maryland, and say, look here, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna study your town and see what is best in your town economically to do. and we got this whole pot of money. If Oprah can put up $20 million for a goddamn
That we'll edit it out.
for a museum down there, then they can put up $20 million for economic development. And have this money there, not for people to control, but for people to use to develop jobs. And people can be free, and people can work, and people can make money. An institution that says everybody in the academic. So there's plenty of jobs to be done that don't call for college. But we need the money to develop those jobs. We need our black money to come in there and say, here it is, get the job done. That's what I want to see done.
Well, millions of people will hear your message, I hope, as we develop our oral history program of Black Power Chronicles. So on behalf of Black Power Chronicles, I'd like to thank you so much for coming and spending this afternoon at the University of the District of Columbia. Love you.
Love you too, sweetie. Hope I gave you what you're looking for.
You got it. You got it.
Okay.
I wanted to hear from you. That's
Okay.
what I wanted to hear.
All right.
Okay. And
All
I
right.
did.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.